bred in this province, right? And to do that, the commercial industry and the small flock industry and everyone else, zoos and aquariums and our non-regulated folks are trying to keep the disease out firstly, right? And then if we have it, and you've seen CFI's response, you want to keep it in, and then we shut it down. And if you are unlucky enough to be one of those IPs, shutting down means destruction of those animals and a quarantine zone and control zones go up around 10 kilometers around you with everything else that we need to shut this down. This does impact our trade in this country, and we're trying to reduce its impact. Now, how do we spread diseases? Of course, birds incubating disease. So that can come from things like wild birds or birds that you potentially may have bought at an auction or a show or a buy-sell trade. Animals other than livestock. So as Brian mentioned, we're seeing it in wild birds now and other wildlife, vermin, insects, foxes and skunks, so scavengers. But like I said, it can come in practically anywhere. But our wild bird focus is seeming the one that has us most concerned right now still. And of course, clothing, shoes, hair of visitors and employees moving from farm to farm or wherever. Also contaminated feed. Water can be a big one, and that's what we've seen with some of these ponds where your ducks have gone down the pond every day, and that's how they picked it up from the wild birds. Bedding and soil can be an issue. And of course, carcasses of dead birds, and that's our concern with it jumping into things like raptors, scavengers, turkey vultures, that we could be spreading disease back and forth, both to your neighbors and to wild birds if you guys have it, or you're bringing the disease right to your farm. Contaminated farm equipment and vehicles, airborne particles, etc. But yes, this is just the schematic of what I just talked about. We see transmission within birds, but we move disease around. We are fantastic moving disease around in the poultry industry. That's what we seem to do really well, and that's a function both of small flocks and commercial flocks. I'm not going to pick on either one. I'm going to pick on both because we can be really good at doing that. Now, when it comes to the health status of your flock, you guys know when things are good, you know when things are bad. So if you've got any issues with your flock, you're concerned, well, then don't bring them to shows or auctions. And I know, in some cases, that's how you get rid of your crap birds. Well, that could be an issue, or you could be bringing it back from you that way. All these things here, I know you guys don't want to hear, right? I'm not going to read through them, but long and short of it is we're not out of the woods yet. I'm really hoping the weather is going to help us. The heat is drying things out. It's killing virus in the environment. I'm hoping that we don't have any hidden reservoirs that are going to still come back to bite us. Of course, any of our risks are the commingling. That's why we had the order. The order is now over, but that doesn't mean that disease is gone. And many other diseases have shown up at shows and auctions and everywhere else. So these diseases pose a risk. They can be a risk to your industry. It can be a risk to your hobby. It can be a risk to your birds themselves. So first, if you're bringing birds home, quarantine them. And when I say quarantine, proper quarantine, so it's not in the same building or sharing the same ventilation, that you're changing clothes, because we can have birds that have no clinical signs. And we've seen this before with this disease where ducks have harbored the disease because it's supposed to adapt to the ducks, and suddenly your chickens or turkeys died. It's tested positive in pigeons as of the past weekend, and it was because these pigeons not look sick, but they were on an infected premise that had another bird species, and for CFA nuked the whole place, they actually tested the pigeons and any other bird that was on there, and that was one of the things that surprised us on that. So for those of you who say that pigeons don't get AI, we beg to differ now. When it comes to things that you want to look at, it's going to be things like separating these new birds from your current flock, no common ventilation, avoiding the spread of pathogens, separate clothing, boots, and equipment, and feeding and handling of these birds at the end of the day, because you want to keep your birds healthy, the ones you have, and feed the quarantine birds last, just in case they have something, so you're not potentially bringing something from one to the other. And of course, listen to your mom, wash your hands. That is a fantastic thing to be doing all the time. Look for internal and external parasites, vaccinations, although it's not an option with high path AI, though hopefully we will get a vaccine at some point. There is a lot of research being done across the world on this specific H5N1 vaccination. And treat diseases, and sanitation of any you've transported those birds in is critical. If you have wooden crates that you move birds around in, do me a favor and burn them into ash and get plastic crates, something you can actually clean and disinfect. And then finally, know your birds, know the birds are coming onto your site, have your quarantine facility, and clean and disinfect. And I know I've said this, I've pounded this message for long, but we can always do better. If you think you're doing a good job, great. Good ways you can do better. And finally, if you have visitors, make sure you've got some biosecurity policies that they follow, and make sure you just lower the risk, because like I said, I'm hoping that we're seeing a decline in infected premises, but we are still getting positives in the US, where it's much warmer than here, and we're still getting positives out west at a fairly alarming rate, and in some zones that there's lots of poultry. And of course, plan your farm visits, I say this to our commercial folks, plan your farm visits from flocks of higher to lower health status to minimize disease spread, which means usually younger to older. On your farm or in your loft, it's going to be making sure you deal with your youngest birds first, then deal with your oldest birds last. Going into the barn is always where the risk is, so at least have soap and hand sanitizer and disinfect everything coming in, whether it's the shovel, whatever. I know we love to take pictures of birds. Your cell phone is probably one of the dirtiest pieces of equipment you carry on you on a regular basis, so these can be disinfected also. And of course, footwear, and I have a bugaboo with the plastic boots because they're slippery and you walk across gravel, they're useless, but dedicated footwear for inside your coop is almost a requirement. I've got a bit of a hate relationship with foot baths. You guys know this because they're difficult to maintain. And of course, proper clothing is going to be important, especially gloves and boots and overalls. And if you're moving birds in a vehicle, or you're moving yourself in a vehicle, then pay specific attention to things like the interior mats and of course organic matter from the tires or wheel wells. Our commercial feed guys are disinfecting tires and undercarriage of their trucks on entry to every poultry barn in the province practically right now. So that is why they're doing it. If you're seeing these trucks pulled over at the side of the highway and the guy's walking around with a sprayer, please don't hit him. He's trying to keep his clients as safe as possible and prevent disease spread. And as we've seen, this slide I've used for years, and I never thought I'd have to use it during a course of a outbreak again. But all these things that are important, including things like going into and through zones and disinfecting and everything else we've seen. So there's lots of information on the PIC website that can talk about that. And the CFI website has all this information as far as permitting that you might need. So who we're reaching out to, you guys are kind of like preaching to the converted. That's not, you're a great target, but we want to reach everyone, commercial, non-commercial, and our small flock stakeholders, including the backyard, the urban poultry. I've thrown in pet bird owners because you've come and joined us now too over the weeks, which is fantastic. Our veterinarians on the small flock and commercial poultry side have been great assets to us. We've reached out to zoos and of course the wild bird folk, and I'm sure there's other folks we need to hit too. So spring, it's been crazy, but yeah, just be sure that you don't walk disease onto your farm or your yard or your run, or make sure that you don't entice it with wild birds. Report any sickness to your veterinarian. Wild bird exclusion is going to be huge. Pick up spilled feed. Rodents are I think they're a concern we have that we may not even realize how much of an issue they are, especially the fact that rats live outside the barn. They come in and out, and they go down to drink at the pond. So, when is spring migration over? Hopefully soon. There's still a few birds still traveling north, but I'm hoping we get into the heat of the summer that we can lower our risk level. But as I said before, clean, clean, and clean again. And if you have any concerns over a sick bird or you see high mortality, call this number. We've had a number of calls over the last few weeks from small flock stakeholders, and most of them, or pretty much all of them, have been negative. But this means the system's working. You guys are seeing something that doesn't seem right, and you're calling the number in, and we'll see if I will get someone out there to sample to make sure. And this has been, I think, one of the success stories of this spring is that people are actually calling the line. And of course, if you see dead wild birds with neurological issues, call Canadian Wildlife Health Cooperative. So we got wild bird deterrence is always an issue. We have wild bird deterrence fact sheets on our website that talk about migratory birds, and then for non-native species, you can call Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. But when things go crazy, like, are you ready? Are you ready to deal with this? You already know some of the numbers that are out there, but once again, what happens if this is your place and suddenly you start seeing some dead ducks in the pond and you see high mortality in your barn? What do? Well, first of all, call this number, call the 226 number, look at all your biosecurity measures, check the websites, including PIC and Ontario Animal Health Network, report the dead wild birds, Canadian Wildlife Health Cooperative, and keep cleaning. And finally, if you suspect something exists, an issue, then these guys will sample and then lock yourself down. So you're going to put yourself into quarantine until we know. And like I said, for the folks that have called this number, they've locked themselves down until we get that negative. And then, I still feel bad for them because they have a disease issue on their farm they're trying to deal with, but at least it's not high path avian influenza. So with that, stay safe, be vigilant, take care of your birds, take care of your clients, take care of the rest of the industry, and we can all do better.